Hello again and welcome. Smells like a Space Marine fanboy. Hello again, my little conscripts, and welcome to another Mordian Glory video. In today's episode, we've got more spicy beef for your viewing pleasure. But this time, I've got a double doozy for you. Not only have I got some prime beef, some GW website beef, but I've also got some Mordian Glory beef. That's right, your boy done messed up, and it's time for me to own it. And so, with all of that said, let's fix bayonets and charge right into this thing. Now, the first thing I want to address is very simple. It's this. There. You happy now? On a more serious note, I recently did a video about the Horus Heresy saga, and we dove into the third-party retailers and the stock that they had available around Saturnine. This all came about because we were able to see that third-party retailers like Alchemist Workshop had 300 plus in stock even after doing a bit of a fire sale, but other retailers like Wayland Games and like Darksphere had somehow just got rid of all of their stock when they had hundreds of boxes. Now, this is where I messed up, and I need to take a bit of accountability here. In that video, I got a little bit carried away, and we started getting like full X-Files conspiracy theory with it, saying, oh my god, you know, Darksphere went from having like 60 in stock to 0, and Wayland Games went from having like 945 in stock to like 0. What's happened? Has there been like a product recall? All this kind of stuff. It was a little bit over the top, but I will admit, I kind of got carried away. But fate works in mysterious ways, and after I released that video, I actually received an email, and that email was from none other than Wayland Games themselves. So Richard, the managing director, reached out to myself and to Hellstorm Mikey, and he gave us a little bit of a behind the scenes look at what had actually been happening with the Saturnine pre-order. Not only that, but he actually completely dismantled a whole bunch of myths and rumors that had been flying around all of this as well. Some of which I will admit I had also highlighted. For example, the whole GW sales rep needing you to have a minimum order to get into a pre-order. Now, Rich has asked that I don't share the email in its entirety, and that's fair enough. You don't want someone going through and picking apart all of your words. What he has said is, please feel free to reference this email and talk about what is inside it. So, fair play. And I think before we go any further, let's all just say, you know, fair play. Respect to Wayland Games for being active in the community. Not only have they been quite transparent on things like Daka Daka and other forums, I think maybe like Facebook and stuff, but the fact that they took the time to reach out and send what I would say is a very professional but very human email is fantastic. So credit where credit is due. This is a great email, and it definitely helps us cut through the fog of war and just get to the truth. So with all of that said, now let's go through the points raised in the email and have a quick chat about them. First up, Wayland says that there's no product recall as far as they are aware of. That was one of the conspiracy theories that I had been bandying about, with the fact that suddenly they'd gone from loads of stock to no stock. And Wayland says there's no product recall as far as they're aware of, and they have not returned any copies of the game or any components. It's just if there was any problems with the order, they would resolve and deal with it. They said obviously occasionally damaged and affected products would be returned, but that hasn't happened here. Freudian glory conspiracy theory number 1 out of the window. There was no product recall. Okay, that was definitely me getting a bit carried away. Next up, Richard clarified that the order numbers that they had were entirely down to them. There was no thing about GW having minimum order stocks to get on the pre-order or anything like that. That was a rumor that I had been told. I had a lot of people come out to me and say that, but according to Wayland, that's not something they've ever experienced, and that's not something that they are aware of. So maybe that is just one of those rumors that somebody told somebody that, and then it got repeated enough time going around the internet, and eventually it almost became fact because enough people said it, but the truth is it's not the case. So as far as Wayland is concerned, they are not aware that there is any like minimum buy-in in order to qualify for a pre-order. In fact, Wayland goes a step further and says that they ordered multiple thousands of this box set. It was a huge amount. And the reason they did this was because they were aware that GW is going through a manufacturing move at the moment. And they were worried that if they didn't order enough, that they would have a supply constraint both with the pre-order and post-launch. So that explains why they got so many. But what about the fire sale? What about the deep discount? Well, Wayland have answered that as well. The email says that after the initial release weekend, they always have a catch-up when you've got like a pre-order like this. And they noticed that the sales were much lower than they had hoped for. They give a bit of context here saying that sales of a new release item can always vary, but generally 80% of sales happen over the first couple of days. And in that couple of days, 80% of those in the first few hours, which is incredible that so much of it happens in such a short space of time. I mean, that is actually a little bit mind-blowing. But going into what happened with the sale, the stock they had was huge, and so they had to make a choice, and they had to make it fast. They knew that demand would drop off over time from launch, and even though they have a large warehouse, they just can't have huge amounts of space possibly tied up. So they decided to go for the big sale. They decided to go for the price incentive, and they just went with it. And it worked, because they sold every single box. And to give a little bit of perspective, Richard said that they ordered just over 50% more than the previous Horus Heresy version release. So in terms of absolute numbers sold, it has already significantly outperformed the previous edition already. I guess it goes to show, if you put a big discount on something, that it will sell. Now, let me just comment on this for a moment, my own perspective on this. It's going to seem like I'm glazing Wayland, and I will do just for a moment here. It was a ballsy maneuver, and they made it quickly, and they made it decisively, and it paid off, man. They could have had thousands of boxes sat in stock. That would have been tens of thousands of pounds of just dead stock. Because as they said, they have to sell it at the beginning, or basically it struggles to sell at all. So now that they have done this sale, and they were the first to do it, if you're not first, you're last. If you're not first, you're last. And they were not only the first to do it, but they did it well, and it worked. And now look at them. They may not have made as much money as they could have wanted from it. I mean, obviously selling at 35% off versus selling 20% off, right? But they would have made something from it. At the very least, they won't have made a big loss from this. And they will have covered their ass and managed what could have been a nightmare scenario. I just think hats off. They had to make a call. They made a call. It was the right call. And I think they've come out the other side of this smelling like roses. But going back to the email for a moment, there was one last bit which I thought was fascinating. And again, I love having this sort of peek behind the curtain because I genuinely find it interesting. But one of the things that Richard said in the email was that based on their website, sometimes it can be difficult to understand like how large that they've got now. And he said, look, he was trying not to brag about this, but it's always difficult when you're sort of talking about your success as a company. And he was like, look, we've got a new warehouse. It's like a robotic warehouse. It's insane to watch in action. And he also said that it's totally normal for them to shift 900, 1,000 of a box in a single day. It's a regular occurrence, especially around pre-orders. And honestly, I think that is incredible because not only does obviously Wayland Game deserve a well done for their success, they've been around for a long time. I've known about them for a long time. They've clearly been sort of managing and growing and all that kind of stuff. So, fair play. If they are seeing those numbers, that is, mind-blowing. But it's also mind-blowing to me because I've been playing this game for like a long time. I remember when the only place that could survive off only selling GW stuff was Games Workshop. Going down to your local hobby store, your local Games Workshop, and seeing all the models was amazing. And if you ever found Warhammer in another shop, it wouldn't be like a third-party retailer who exclusively sells like tabletop miniatures. They would have all sorts like airfix kits and sort of painting and supplies and all that kind of stuff. It'd be like an artwork and hobby, and miniatures, and also like this Warhammer thing. And the fact that we've gone from that in my lifetime to companies like Wayland and many other third-party retailers who are immense in size and can survive entirely off base, well, not necessarily entirely, but can get a huge amount of their revenue from selling Warhammer and Games Workshop products. It just shows how far we've come. And I think it is another piece of evidence to show sort of how mainstream Warhammer has become and Games Workshop has become. All right, so that covers off the MG beef. But let's get to why you're all really here, the GW beef. I don't mean to alarm you, but we hacked the Games Workshop website. Kinda. Okay, not really, not even slightly. But we did find out something funny. So in the previous episode of this saga, drama, shit show, farming for clicks, whatever you want to call it, we talked about the video that Hellstorm Wargaming had made showing how you could find out how many Wayland games had in stock, even if they said 10 plus. How essentially you could just keep adding to basket until it said, oh, we don't have all of this in stock. You will need to wait for some of this to come on back order. So for example, if they had like 100 in stock, you could add 100 to basket and it would say, yep, this is fine. We can ship this, no problem. But the moment you went to like 101, it would go, oh, some of this is in stock. Some of this isn't in stock. So you're going to have to wait while some of it comes on back order. Quick side note, go and check that video out. Shout out to Hellstorm Wargaming, all that good stuff. He's done a fantastic video on this and it's definitely worth your time watching it. But here is where GW enters the equation. You see, one of my viewers, shout out to Krieg Marshall Mathers, saw this and had a brilliant idea, an actual genius idea. Because he saw this concept of you could keep adding to box until it says we haven't got this in stock, and said, what if we applied this to the Games Workshop website? And let me tell you, he found something. He found something big. So the first thing we need to do is test to see if this system works, if this idea works. So we can do that by going to a GW product and adding it to basket and seeing if we can just add as many as we want, or if there's a point where the website will tell us, no, we haven't got that. So for example, if we take something like the Imperial Navy Avenger Strike Fighter, and by the way, I've picked this one because I've already tested this and it's a relatively quick number to get to, we can add one of these to cart. And you'll see it says, great, you've added it to cart. Now, you can actually add up to 10 at a time to your cart. So if we add 10, it now says we've got 11. But if we try and add more than that, oh, it says insufficient stock amount. So what we can then do is sort of add one at a time, or you can, or a few at a time. See, we can't add 5. So why don't we try adding 4? Okay, that works. So there's 17. If we try and add one more, insufficient stock amount. So we now know that GW has got 17 Imperial Navy Avenger Strike Fighters in stock. Now, you can do this on any product, and you can find out how much stock that GW has. But some of you may have noticed the big challenge with this. Unlike on Wayland Games' website, where you can just type in the number that you want, on Games Workshop website, you have to add a maximum of 10 to your basket at a time. So you have to add 10, 10, 10, 10, until you start reaching that point where it says insufficient stock, and then you have to sort of add one at a time until you can get to the number. Now, when we're looking at the Imperial Navy Strike Fighter, which is an expert kit, which is a resin kit, which they won't sell too many of, you can do that very quickly. As you saw, we got to 17 in a few minutes. But what if you wanted to find out how many of another box set GW had? Maybe a big one. Maybe one in plastic. Well, you would have to add 10 at a time over and over and over and over again until you actually do get a capture show up. So we have to select all the bags here. I am not a robot. There you go. And then you can add another 10 at a time. And you have to keep doing this and doing this and doing this until you get to the number. But eventually, you would be able to find out how many of any box set GW has in stock. Now, the reason that this is interesting is because obviously we've talked about how Wayland Games struggled to move Saturnine, but by doing a fire sale, they actually managed to clear everything off the decks. But GW doesn't do sales. GW has never done a sale. They'll do bundles. So, get a combat patrol, you'll get a discount doing that. But they don't do sales. So naturally, it stands to reason that GW may have struggled to move the Saturnine box. But the only way we could find that out is if somebody sat there for hours clicking add 10 to cart, add 10 to cart, add 10 to cart. And who would be mad enough to do that? Well, my friends, never underestimate the power of weaponized autism, because we had 2 people in the MG community, shout out to Squark and to Creek Marshall Mathers, who sat down, locked in, and did exactly that. And what they found were some truly eye-watering numbers. So firstly, they tested this on the US web store for Games Workshop. And after adding to cart constantly, the maximum that they were allowed to order of Saturnine from Games Workshop was 9,131. 9,131. That was the maximum that they could add to cart from the US side of the GW website. This came to a whopping $2,876,265 worth of stock that GW has in Horus Heresy Saturnine. Now, to be clear, that's not obviously how much it would have cost GW to make the box, because they sell for a big margin. That's why they're able to sell them over to third-party retailers for like 40% off typically. But it does represent the amount of revenue GW could have got, not profit, but revenue GW has tied up in these boxes. But wait, there's more. Because if you go over to the GW UK store, you can actually add more. In fact, it maxes out at 9,999. And to be clear, it doesn't say insufficient stock when you get to 9,999. It just stops working. It just stops letting you add more to cart, but it doesn't say insufficient stock. So the implication here is that GW has over 10,000 or at least 10,000 boxes of Saturnine in stock right now in the UK alone. But full disclaimer, we don't know this for sure. The way the GW website works in the UK could be very different to the way it works in the US. After all, everything for Warhammer is produced in the UK and then has to be shipped to the rest of the world. Whereas in the UK, obviously, they could just produce it and then just ship it pretty quickly. So the idea is maybe with something like Saturnine, which is a big box set which they're expecting to order a lot of, they just put like a ridiculous number available in stock because they know they're always going to be able to like fulfill the requirements because the manufacturing is right there in country. Whereas something like in the US, if they just put a ridiculous number in stock, although 9,131 is a pretty high number, but if they had like an infinite number there and they got a number of cells they weren't expecting, that could cause delays where they have to produce things and ship it over. So there is obviously wiggle room here, and what we're seeing here might not be entirely accurate of the situation. All we can say is, look, you can add almost 10,000 and then the system just stops working. There is obviously a potential implication there, not fact, but implication there, that GW has at least that many, if not more, in stock right now. And the website just caps out at 9999. Now, is this information game-breaking and mind-blowing in any way, shape, or form? No. In fact, it's a great example of useless yet slightly interesting information. Because at the end of the day, the moment that somebody buys something, that stock count changes and the information that you have just becomes like useless. And also, like we said, GW could just be putting numbers available in, knowing that they'll be able to produce to meet that demand. And do you know what? It could be a simple case of it's the GW website. It's a little janky. Maybe it's not quite working as intended. Truth be told, it's just an example of an interesting mental exercise. And if you've got a lot of free time, a touch of tism, and you want to just add 10 to cart at a time, you can find out the stock of anything GW has for their products in your country. Maybe that's interesting to you. Maybe you should go outside and touch grass. Maybe I should go outside and touch grass. But it's more like interesting information than useful information. But it is kind of cool. But that's it. That's all of the beef that I've got for you guys today. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed today's video, then don't forget to go ahead and smash the like button. And if you want to see more content like this, then subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian Glory Hole, today is your lucky day.